There could be delays to some non-emergency ambulance call-outs from today. That's the work to rule by workers in the National Ambulance Service, which is getting underway today. Members of SIPTU and Unite are taking the industrial action because their pay rates are out of kilter with other health professionals. They say frontline staff have taken on major increases in responsibility and qualifications, but that agreed recommendations on pay and career structures have still not been implemented. The HSE says contingency plans are in place and insists substantial pay proposals have already been made. I've been speaking about all of this with the SIPTU Ambulance Sector Organiser, John McCamley. John, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thanks for being with us. What are your members telling you about conditions and pressures within the National Ambulance Service?
Well, SIPTU members recently conducted a survey and it indicates that morale is at an all-time low within the ambulance service. Now, this is to do with a number of different factors, but particularly a long-run dispute over enhanced pay rates, which unfortunately has led to the present dispute where we have started to work the rule this morning and then begin a 24-hour stoppage tomorrow.
The unions, you're saying ambulance staff have taken on greater responsibilities and qualifications in recent years. What exactly has changed in the role?
Well, the role has completely changed over the last 15, 20 years. So primarily it was a patient transport service, i.e. you picked up the patient and brought them to the ED. But over the last couple of years, it's changed to a pre-hospital care service where the patients are actually treated either at the scene of an incident or in the back of the ambulance before they get to the ED. This has changed the model completely where our members now, can deal with a whole range of different issues. They administer, I think in 1999, they administer about 4 medications, and for paramedics, that's up to 31. For advanced paramedics, that's up to 57. So the model has completely changed. Even the training has changed where previously, you did a course for a couple of months, but now it's a degree level course. So they're up to the standard of other health professionals. And obviously the level of responsibility has increased as well. The workload has increased. Obviously staffing is a problem. But these issues have led to this particular dispute because an independent report has found that pay is completely out of kilter with other health professionals because they're still being paid as if it's a transporter providing a transport service.
You're accusing the HSE of failing to implement recommendations from the 2020 Roles and Responsibilities Review. What are the key recommendations you believe have been ignored?
Well, the main recommendation is specifically around where the independent report says the party should engage to look at enhanced pay scales for the members. It makes the point that, look, compared to other health professionals and the work that our members have undertaken over the last 15 to 20 years, that it's out of kilter now with their colleagues working in other roles within the health service. And part of this is just about pay parity. Doing a role, if you're doing a role that requires a particular educational standard, requires a particular level of skill, well, there's certain pay rates for that within the HSE. Unfortunately, our members are still being paid as if they're not doing those particular roles. So as I've alluded to there, look, the role has completely altered, completely changed over the last 15 years. We've been promised that that these pay issues would be addressed, and that the HSE have failed to do that over a number of times over the last 15 years.
The HSE, for their part, would say proposals worth between 3 and 14% in pay increases were already put on the table. Why did your members reject those?
Well, unfortunately, within those particular proposals, while on the basic pay there were increases, but there was also reductions on the other side of that, like removing Sunday pay, removing Saturday pay, removing shift pay. So on one hand, it looked on paper that they were given the rises that our members wanted, but on the other hand, they were removing the other elements of pay that our members have. And obviously our members work a 24-hour service. Sometimes they do forced overruns. Because obviously you can't just stop the ambulance at 8 o'clock when you're finished, and you have to be paid premium pay after that. And the problem with the set of proposals that our members had is that it was, yes, addressing the basic pay, but on the other hand, it was removing pay. So it wasn't really an increase.
Is this dispute, is it solely about pay, John, or are there wider concerns in relation to staffing, workload, reform within the service itself?
Well, the particular dispute itself, yes, is primarily about the non-implementation of the recommendation. But as I've said there is a very low morale in the National Ambulance Service. Staffing is a main concern, and obviously pay attracts people within the service. The National Ambulance Service itself has indicated that it requires almost double the staffing that it presently has. And because of the lack of staffing, the workload and the burden on our members has increased. And obviously that's not good for the general public as well, because obviously that means they're waiting longer for an ambulance and things and situations like that. So, look, if we can sort the pay element, we can attract people within the service. But there is obviously a staffing component to this as well, and trying to increase, patient transport services for our intermediate care vehicles, increase the number of emergency ambulances. That's the goal that the union has looked for. But we need to address the pay issue first and foremost.
There will be people listening this morning, John, who'll be quite concerned and worried about ambulance delays with the work to rule getting underway today. What assurances can you give them that emergency care will still be protected?
Well, during the work to rule, there's a number of elements within the work to rule about people not doing work outside of their own contract of employment, and obviously tomorrow we have the 24-hour stoppage. Where members have graciously, obviously, put in place contingency plans for emergency level cover tomorrow. We believe that we've been very generous in providing care while people are, besides the fact that our members are technically on strike, our members will provide, emergency ambulances if required, will deal with, critical calls. So we've provided a level of cover tomorrow in relation to strike and through this industrial action to make sure that we don't unduly affect the public.
Even with that in mind, and the HSE is asking people with non-life-threatening issues to use GPs, pharmacies and injury units instead, and even with what you've just outlined there, do you accept that the work to rule today and the action from tomorrow is going to inevitably place pressure on other parts of the health system?
Well, when you have industrial action, the point and purpose of obviously industrial action, strike action, is that there will be some curtailment of services. But I think that in our engagement with management, our members have understood they don't want to be on strike. They don't want to put members of the public at risk, and they have provided during the industrial action emergency cover. There will be, some services will be curtailed, but in general, I think there will be emergency ambulances there if required.
There will be critics, John, no doubt you're aware, who will say frontline healthcare workers shouldn't strike because of the risks involved. What would you say to that criticism?
Well, again, I say that, our members don't want to be on strike. And in fairness, they've been very patient. It's 6 years now since the independent report indicated that enhanced pay scales should be offered to our members. It's even longer in relation to the dispute the union has had. And they were promised money in benchmarking, which never materialised. They were promised every time they upskilled that money would be paid. That never materialised. So we've done everything in our power to avoid industrial action, but unfortunately, our members have to further their claim. They have to further to try to argue for what they need, and unfortunately, we've got to this particular point. We have no other choice now at this stage, because no one is listening to us. And unfortunately, we've taken this action on the basis to try to get people to listen to us, try to get people into talks. And even at this late hour, we call on the HSE, we call on the Department of Health to enter discussions with ourselves with meaningful proposals without preconditions, so we can get this sorted.
The HSE says it accepted both the Workplace Relations Commission's proposals and the Labour Court recommendations last year. Where do negotiations stand now, and is there any room for compromise from the union side?
Well, the unions have put forward proposals. Unfortunately, last time we met with the HSE, they didn't have any comment on those particular proposals. And, that's very unfortunate. And it is, I think at this point, the gap between the parties is quite large. So the only thing that our members are seeking at this point is to address the long historic pay injustice that they've suffered over the last while, and just recognise the work they've undertaken from changing the service over the last 15 years, for changing the educational standard, for taking on the additional workload. That's all they're looking for that recognition. And unfortunately, that recognition just isn't coming.
Are you concerned at all, John, that public support could weaken if the industrial action escalates into longer stoppages that are planned later this month and into June?
Well, at the moment, I mean, asking any of our members around the country, I can SIPTU represent just under 2,000 members. There's been a great amount of public support for our members. People understand the difficult task that our members undertake. They understand that the level of skill and training they have to undertake to carry out their job. And at this juncture, I think the public understand that you can't attract people to that service. If they want a fully staffed service, you just have to pay people the right amount of money.
What would the HSE need to do ASAP to prevent the planned escalation to the 48-hour and 72-hour strikes? And have there been any fresh talks or contacts with management ahead of tomorrow's 24-hour stoppage?
No, unfortunately, at the moment, management, as I've alluded to, management haven't put forward any sort of concrete proposals. The unions have. We've indicated a pathway of dealing with this. Unfortunately, management are insisting that there are preconditions to any talks. Now, to get talks underway, you can't have particular preconditions. Their preconditions is, don't mind all the stuff that our members have done up for the last 15 years. We want to talk about further modernisation, further changes, and then we'll talk about pay. So that's just unacceptable to our members, because that has been the trap that we've fallen into for all this time. That every single time management come to us, they go, well, we'll want a bit more modernisation, we'll a bit more changes, and then we'll address pay. And every time they do it, they then pay isn't resolved, and that's the major issue. So at this stage, we just want what addressing what we've done for the last 15 and 20 years.
If the dispute continues unresolved, how far are your members prepared to go?
Well, that will be a decision for our members. At the moment, we have a number of days planned for strike action. We obviously have the work the rule, which is ongoing. So that decision will be made. Hopefully, cooler heads can prevail at some stage, and hopefully, the HSE and the Department of Health, decide that, look, our members are of value, and they provide a critical service, and that they'll sit down without any preconditions.
Just finally, John, what would you say to government ministers about the urgency of resolving this dispute? What do you want to see from their part?
Well, what I'd say is that, obviously, in our opinion, the National Ambulance Service does not have enough staff. It needs to attract those staff. And in doing so, we need to address the pay conditions that our members are working under. It's just not good enough after, at the top of the scale for a paramedic who's a degree course. It takes 11 years to get to around €47,000 when other health professionals are paid almost double that. It seems ridiculous that our members in this day and age are providing such a critical care service. And, we can't get, pay justice for our members at this stage.
Well, we'll watch developments with great interest. But for the moment, SIPTU Ambulance Sector Organiser John McCamley, thank you for joining us on Morning Focus.
Thank you again. Cheers.